The divorce papers landed on the king's desk at 11 minutes past midnight, and Nadia had been holding them for 6 hours before she finally let go. She had carried them in her coat, folded once, then twice, then once more until the crease ran straight through the signature line like a scar. She had walked through the east corridor of the palace 3 times before she turned around. She had stood outside his study door for 9 minutes. She had counted. Cale was still at his desk when she walked in. He did not look up. That was the thing about him. He never looked up when she entered a room. He had not looked up on their wedding day either, not until the priest said her name, and even then it was the kind of look a man gives a painting on a wall. Brief, courteous, and then away. She placed the papers on the edge of his desk and stepped back. He looked at them, then he looked at her. And in the silence that followed, Nadia felt something she had not felt in 4 years of marriage to this man. Frey. But that was midnight, and this story begins much earlier than that. It begins in a courthouse in the city of Ashford, on a Thursday in late October, 4 years and 3 months before Nadia walked into that study. It begins with a pen and a name and a father who had already decided that his daughter's future was a thing he could trade like land. Nadia had been 23 years old. She had been wearing a blue dress because her mother told her blue was calming, and Nadia had thought, calming for whom? Not for her, for everyone else in the room maybe. For her father who stood beside the notary with his hands clasped behind his back, for the 2 lawyers who smelled like the same expensive soap, for Cale's assistant, who handed over a folder of documents so thick it could have been a novel. Not for Nadia. She had not been told the details of the arrangement until 4 days before the signing. Her father, Leonard Hargrove, had come into her room on a Sunday evening when she was reading, and he had sat down in the chair by the window and he had said, "There is something you need to know." She had put down her book. He had told her in the kind of flat, even tone that men use when they have already decided the thing is done, and are only now informing the people it will affect. Cale Draven, the youngest chairman ever elected to lead the Eastern Territory Council, had approached Leonard about a merger between their family-held land trusts. The merger required a legal binding between the 2 families. The binding that made the most sense, according to Cale's legal team, was a marriage. Nadia had sat very still. "You'll want for nothing," her father had said. "His resources are considerable." She had looked at the window behind him. The streetlight outside made an orange circle on the curtain. "When?" she said. 4 days. She had not argued. She had learned early that argument with Leonard Hargrove was not a conversation. It was a wall. You could speak at it as long as you liked and it would remain a wall. So on that Thursday in October, Nadia had worn the blue dress and signed her name and become Nadia Draven, and the courthouse had smelled like old wood and printer toner, and Cale had shaken her hand after the signing like she was someone he had just met at a conference. She had thought, "This is my life now." What she had not thought was, "This is temporary." She had not been brave enough for that thought yet. That bravery would take 4 years to grow inside her slowly, the way something grows in the dark. The palace was not a palace in the way people imagine when they hear that word. It was large, certainly. It had been in the Draven family for 3 generations, a sprawling estate with wings that went on further than Nadia had walked in the first 2 months. The ceilings were high and the floors were cold marble that held the morning chill until almost noon. The staff were quiet and efficient, and they looked at Nadia with a particular kind of careful politeness that she understood meant, "We know this is not what you chose, and we are choosing not to mention it." She liked the kitchen best. She liked it because it was warm, and because the head cook, a broad woman named Patricia, did not speak to Nadia like she was made of glass. Patricia spoke to Nadia like she was a person who might or might not want a cup of tea, and Nadia always wanted a cup of tea, and that was the beginning of the only friendship she would make inside those walls. Cale was not unkind. She wanted to be clear about that even in her own mind. He was not cruel. He did not raise his voice or speak harshly to her in front of others. He remembered her birthday. He sent flowers on the anniversary of the signing, not because he was romantic, but because his assistant kept a calendar of such things. But kindness and presence are different things, and Cale Draven was never present. He was in his study, or he was traveling, or he was in meetings that ran until the kind of hours when a house goes fully quiet. When he was home, he was somewhere else in his mind. When they sat at dinner together, he was courteous and he asked about her day and she answered and he nodded, and the silence that came after was not the warm silence of two people comfortable together. It was the silence of two strangers who had run out of things to say. Nadia had tried in the beginning. She had read about his work so she could ask him questions. She had learned the names of the people he worked with. She had cooked a meal herself once in Patricia's kitchen and carried it to his study on a tray, and he had looked at it and then at her with something close to surprise and said, "You didn't have to do that." She had said, "I wanted to." He had eaten it. He had said it was good. And then his phone had rung and he had stepped away, and when he came back, he had not said anything more about the meal or about her standing there in the doorway still holding the empty tray. She had carried the tray back to the kitchen and washed it herself, and Patricia had watched her and said nothing, which was, Nadia was learning, the most generous thing a person could do for another person. By the time the first year ended, Nadia had stopped trying. Not in the way of giving up, not the loud giving up of a woman who slams doors and makes scenes. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of stopping that happens when something runs out of fuel. She simply adjusted to the shape of the life she was living, the way water adjusts to whatever container it is poured into. She had her own routines. She walked every morning, long walks through the eastern grounds of the estate where the old oak trees stood in a row that someone had planted before any of them were born. She read. She took an online course in landscape design because she had always wanted to, and no one had ever asked her opinion on what she wanted, so she had simply started doing it. She kept a small notebook in which she wrote things she noticed. The way light changed across the front lawn at 4 in the afternoon, the sound of rain on the old copper roof, the particular weight of a Tuesday. She wrote down today felt like nothing, not in a sad way, like the day was just a day and didn't need to be anything more. She wrote down Patricia made soup. It tasted like something my grandmother used to make. I didn't know I remembered that taste until today. She wrote down I don't know if I'm unhappy, I don't know if that's worse. That was year 2. Year 3 was the year she found out about Lyra. She had not found out in a dramatic way. There was no letter left carelessly on a desk, no lipstick on a collar, none of the things she might have half expected. She found out because she walked into a room she wasn't supposed to walk into at a time she wasn't supposed to be home. The estate had a private sitting room in the east wing, a room Cale's mother had used and that no one had repurposed since. Nadia had gone there because she had been told by one of the younger housekeepers that there was a water stain forming on the ceiling, and she had wanted to look at it before calling for repairs, which was the kind of task she had taken on gradually, the quiet management of a house that was technically hers. Cale and Lyra were not doing anything obvious. They were simply standing near the window talking, but it was the way they were standing. It was the easy closeness of two people who had stood together many times before. It was the way Lyra's hand rested on Cale's arm, not a gesture of formality but of habit. It was the way Cale's whole body was angled toward her in a way it had never once been angled toward Nadia. They did not see her. She backed out of the room and walked to the kitchen and sat down at the table, and Patricia came over and poured her tea without asking, and Nadia said, quietly, "How long has Lyra Calloway been coming to this house?" Patricia set down the teapot very carefully. "A long time," she said. Nadia wrapped both hands around the cup. "Before me," she said. "Yes," Patricia said. "And during?" Nadia nodded. She drank the tea. It was too hot and she drank it anyway. "Thank you," she said. She did not cry. She sat in the kitchen for a long time. She thought about the blue dress. She thought about the orange circle of light on the curtain of her childhood room. She thought about the way Cale had shaken her hand on the day of the signing, and how she had noticed even then that his grip was loose, like he was already letting go. She thought, I was never the choice, I was the arrangement. And then she thought something else, something that surprised her. Neither was Lyra, though. Because Lyra Calloway had also been waiting, all these years, for a man who could not name her publicly, who could stand close to her in empty rooms but could not stand beside her in front of the world. Nadia looked at the shape of Lyra's life from the outside and saw something she had not expected, another woman trapped in a different cage. This did not make her feel warm toward Lyra. It did not make the pain smaller or the betrayal lighter, but it made the shape of the whole thing clearer. And clarity, Nadia was learning, was its own kind of power. She went upstairs and opened her notebook and she wrote, "Today everything changed, not because I found out something new, because I finally let myself see what was already there." That night, for the first time in 3 years of marriage, she locked the bedroom door from the inside. Cale did not knock on it. She did not know whether that was because he already knew she knew, or because he simply had not planned to come by anyway. In the morning she unlocked it and got dressed and went down to breakfast, and they sat across from each other, and he said, "Good morning," and she said, "Good morning," and the housekeeper poured coffee, and the morning went on exactly the way all the other mornings had gone. Except now Nadia was watching everything differently. She watched the way Cale answered his phone with his whole body turning away. She watched the way he smiled at certain messages and then closed the screen immediately. She watched the way Lyra Calloway was always present at public events, always described as a family friend, always standing exactly one careful person away from Cale in every photograph. She began to understand the architecture of the lie. It had been built carefully over many years with many small bricks, and she had been placed in the front of it like a decorative stone that made the whole structure look legitimate. She was the wife. The wife was the thing that made it all respectable. She thought about that for a long time. 4 months after the afternoon in the sitting room, Nadia missed something she had been counting on coming. She sat in the bathroom of the east guest room with the door locked and the tap running, and she held a small test in both hands, and she read the result twice. And then she sat on the cold tile floor and pressed her back against the cool wall and breathed. The baby was real. She could feel it the way you feel something true, not with drama or certainty, but with a quiet, deep knowing that settles into you and stays. And she knew, in that same quiet way, exactly what it meant. She had not been with Cale in 4 months. She had not been with Cale in the real sense, the meaningful sense, in much longer than that. There had been one night, her birthday, when something had happened between them that was less about love and more about the particular loneliness of two people in the same house who had stopped knowing how to talk to each other. She had wanted it to mean something. It had not. But the baby was not from that night. The baby was from a different time, a different place, a different man. A man she had seen only twice in the past year, at events where their paths had crossed without planning, and where something old and buried had surfaced for long enough to change everything. His name was Elian. She had known him before Cale. She had known him before the courthouse and the blue dress and the signing. She had known him before her father came and sat in the chair by the window and changed the course of her life with 6 flat sentences. Elian Cole had been 24 when she last saw him properly, when they were still in the years before everything became arrangements and mergers and legal bindings. He had been someone who laughed at the wrong moments and was always running slightly late and called her Nadia with 2 A's because he said she deserved both of them. She had loved him completely and without strategy. That was the thing about loving someone before you learn that love requires strategy. You just love them, with everything available to you, with no plan. And then her father had come and sat by the window. Now she sat on a bathroom floor with her back to the cold wall and the tap still running and the truth in her hands, and she thought, I have to decide what kind of person I am going to be. She could stay, she could do nothing. She could continue being the front stone of the lie, the respectable wife, and she could raise this child inside those walls and let the architecture of deceit hold everything in place, and maybe it would never fall and maybe it would, and either way she would have chosen it by choosing to stay. Or she could leave. Not the dramatic kind of leaving, not the kind with shouting and accusations and papers thrown across rooms, the quiet kind, the planned kind. The kind that requires gathering yourself slowly, like someone packing a bag in the dark, making sure to take only what matters. She turned off the tap. She stood up. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Her face looked exactly the same as it always had. She had expected something to have changed in it. Nothing had. But something inside her had. She opened the bathroom door and walked out into the corridor, and the palace was quiet around her, the way it was always quiet, that particular heavy quiet of a large house that holds many secrets. She went to the kitchen. Patricia was there. It was nearly midnight and Patricia was still there, which meant she had been waiting, because Patricia always seemed to know. Nadia sat down at the table. Patricia put the kettle on without being asked. They sat in the warm quiet of the kitchen, and Nadia said nothing and Patricia said nothing. And the kettle came to a boil, and the tea was poured, and Nadia wrapped both hands around the cup. I need some time, Nadia said. You have time, Patricia said. I need to think. Then think. Nadia looked at the steam rising from the cup. It curled and drifted and disappeared. I'm going to leave, she said. Patricia did not look surprised. She looked at Nadia for a moment with the particular steadiness of a woman who has seen many things and is not frightened by any of them. Yes, she said, I know. Nadia nodded. She drank her tea. Outside the kitchen window, the October wind was moving through the old oak trees, and their leaves were coming down one by one, slow and unhurried, and Nadia watched them fall and thought, things let go when they are ready. You cannot rush it. You can only wait until you are ready and then you open your hands. She folded her hands around the warm cup. She thought soon. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark with her eyes open. The bedroom was quiet and vast, and the ceiling was high above her, and the house breathed around her the way houses do, with the small sounds of pipes and wood and old walls settling. She thought about Elian. She thought about her father. She thought about the blue dress. She thought about the small thing growing inside her, which was hers, which was real, which no arrangement or merger or legal binding had created. She pressed one hand flat against her middle. She said quietly into the dark, I'm going to get us out. And that was how it really began. Not with the papers, not with midnight and a study and a king who never looked up when she entered the room. It began with a woman on a bathroom floor choosing to stand up. It began with a cup of tea in a warm kitchen. It began with a hand pressed flat, and a promise made to no one but herself and the small quiet life she was already responsible for. The palace slept around her, and Nadia Draven lay in the dark, and for the first time in 4 years she was not adjusting to the shape of the container. She was measuring the size of the door. In 6 weeks she would have the papers drawn up. In 8 weeks she would walk into that study. But tonight she only breathed, steady and even, and let the plan take its first small root. Outside, the oak leaves fell. Inside, Nadia was already leaving. The state dinner was in honor of no one in particular. That was the thing Nadia had learned about these events. They were held in honor of themselves, in honor of the fact that people with power liked to gather and eat expensive food and look at each other across wide tables and confirm that they were all still there, still relevant, still holding the things they had been holding. The guest list was 70 people. The seating chart had taken an assistant 3 full days. Nadia had been given the final arrangement the morning of the event, and had looked at it and seen, without surprise, that she was seated at the far end of the table from Kale. She had been placed beside a man named George Alderton, 60 years old, very interested in water rights legislation, who had talked at her for 40 minutes about a bill that was moving through the council while she had said yes, and of course, and that's interesting at the appropriate intervals, and eaten her bread roll slowly, piece by piece, because it gave her hands something to do. Across the room, Lyra Calloway stood near the windows in a green dress. Nadia had not known she would be there. She had not expected it. In 3 years of attending these dinners, she had seen Lyra perhaps 4 times, always from a distance, always described on the guest list as a business associate. Tonight she was close enough that Nadia could see the specific way she stood, with one shoulder slightly higher than the other, tilted toward the person she was speaking to like a plant tilting toward sun. The person she was speaking to was Kale. Nadia set down her fork very carefully. She counted the silverware in front of her. A salad fork, a dinner fork, a smaller fork she didn't know the formal name for, a dinner knife, a butter knife, a soup spoon, a dessert spoon laid across the top of the plate like a bridge. 14 pieces total, counting both sides. She counted again, 14. She looked up. Lyra's hand was on Kale's arm. It landed there the way familiar things land, without announcement, without ceremony. It was a hand that had been placed there many times before and knew the way. Kale did not step back. He did not remove it. He stood inside it the way you stand inside something that belongs to you. George Alderton was saying something about river basin mapping. Nadia looked at her water glass and found it empty. She refilled it from the pitcher on the table and drank half of it and set it down. She thought, the room is full of people who know. Not all of them perhaps, but enough. The ones who moved in the same circles, who attended the same events season after season, who read between the lines of every photograph and public appearance. They knew what Lyra was and what Nadia was, and they had simply adjusted to both truths existing in the same space the way you adjust to furniture, walking around it without thinking. Nadia had spent 3 years being furniture. She refilled her glass again. The water tasted like nothing. She drank it anyway. George Alderton paused and looked at her, and she realized he had asked her a question. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was distracted for a moment." He smiled, the indulgent smile of a man who is used to being the most interesting person in any given conversation, and has adjusted to not always being listened to. "I asked if you'd been following the Eastern boundary discussions," he said. "I have," she said, which was true. She had read about them in the morning papers. She read the morning papers every day. She read them at the kitchen table with Patricia, and they went through them section by section, and Nadia had opinions about most things she read, and no one at any of these dinners had ever asked her about those opinions before. George looked pleasantly surprised. "And," he said, "I think the proposal favors existing landholders too heavily," she said. "The smaller farms along the lower basin don't have the legal resources to challenge the initial assessments, so they'll lose ground before the bill even reaches final reading." George stared at her. Across the room, Lyra laughed at something Cale said. It was a soft, private laugh, the kind you don't perform, the kind that comes out of you before you can make it presentable. Nadia heard it without looking. She said, "The language in Section 4 is ambiguous enough that a good lawyer could drive a very large vehicle through it, which is exactly what the larger landholders will do. The smaller families won't have that option." George said, Yes. Actually, yes, that's a very precise observation." Nadia picked up her fork. "Thank you," she said, and she ate her salad and did not look across the room again. But she heard it. She heard all of it. The particular frequency of a woman who is where she belongs, laughing at the right moments, standing close to someone who had chosen her freely and would go on choosing her freely as long as they both lived. Nadia thought, "She has something I don't have. She has been chosen." And then, like a cold hand on the back of her neck, "But she still cannot stand in front of a room and be named." Because that was the other truth about Lyra Calloway. She was the choice, yes. She had always been the choice. But Cale could not make that choice publicly without dismantling the thing he had built, the respectability, the arrangement, the legal binding that had been tied around Nadia's name and welded to the land trust merger that was the real engine of everything. Lyra was the heart of it. Nadia was the front door. Neither of them had been given a real option. She found this thought almost peaceful, not forgiving, not generous, just strangely clear, like looking at a clock and finally understanding how the hands move. After dinner, there were drinks in the adjoining room, and Nadia stood near the east window with a glass of sparkling water, and several people came to speak to her, and she spoke to them pleasantly and remembered their names and asked about their families, and it all went on the way it always went on, and then Cale was at her side. "You look well tonight," he said. "Thank you," she said. "George Alderton seemed very engaged with you." "We were talking about water rights." Cale raised his eyebrows. "Were you?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with that slightly puzzled expression he sometimes got, the one that meant she had been more than he expected. She had noticed over the years that it appeared when she said something precise or direct or informed, and each time it appeared she thought, "You would know I was capable of this if you had ever paid attention." But she said none of that. She smiled and said, "He's very passionate about it." Cale said, "Good, he's important on the council." She nodded. He said, "Lyra sends her regards." Nadia turned to look at him. He was already looking away. She thought, "That is how you do it. You say the name plainly. You put it in my hands in front of a room full of people, and you do not look at me while you do it because if you looked at me you might have to see what it costs." She said, "How kind of her." And she went back to her sparkling water, and the conversation moved on, and the evening continued, and Nadia stood in the room and was the wife, and it went on exactly the way it always went on. Except that on the car ride home she opened her notebook on her phone, the notes application she used when she didn't have the physical one, and she typed, "Today it became something I cannot ignore. Today I stopped pretending it was something I could live inside. I am going to need to find someone I trust. I am going to need to start being careful. She locked her phone and looked out the window at the city going past. Cale was on his phone in the front seat beside the driver. The light from the screen made his face look sharp and pale. She looked away. The next morning she called the doctor. She had been avoiding the call for 2 weeks. Not because she was afraid of what the appointment would bring, she already knew what it would bring, but because knowing and having it confirmed by someone with a clipboard and a white coat and a medical record that now belonged to a paper file were 2 different kinds of knowing. The doctor's office was in the city, small and private, belonging to a physician who treated only a handful of patients and who had signed a confidentiality agreement with a scope so broad it could cover most of the known world. Nadia had found him through a contact of Patricia's, which was how she found most of the things that mattered now. She went alone. She told the house she had an appointment with her landscape design tutor. This was technically not a lie, because she did have such a tutor, a patient woman named Helen who came on Tuesdays and drank too much chamomile tea, and Nadia simply moved the appointment to Tuesday and used Wednesday for the doctor. The office was quiet, and the plants in the waiting room were real and watered, which she noticed and appreciated. She sat in a chair by the window and waited, and the receptionist brought her water in a small paper cup, and she drank it slowly. The doctor, whose name was Leonard, not her father's kind of Leonard, nothing like that. This one had warm eyes and a steady voice and the kind of hands that look like they have held a lot of difficult news gently, called her in, and they sat across from each other at his desk. He had her results. She had come in 10 days earlier for blood work. She had told him everything, plainly, in the careful and precise way she had learned to speak about things she could not afford to get wrong. He had listened without expression and ordered the test she needed. Now he had the results. He told her first what she already knew, which was that she was approximately 9 weeks along, which was consistent with what she had calculated. Then he said what she had been waiting for. The blood type results, he said carefully, are what they are. She nodded. The child's type, he said, is not possible given Cale Draven's documented type. She had known since the bathroom floor, since the wall, since the night she had pressed her hand flat and made the quiet promise. But knowing and hearing it in a clean, clinical sentence from a doctor who had no reason to soften it were different. She sat very still. I understand, she said. I want to be clear, he said, that this result is not a judgment, it is simply data. I know, she said, I'm not ashamed of the data. He looked at her steadily. Good. I'm going to need a certified copy, she said. Of all of it. I can have that prepared. Quickly. By tomorrow morning. Thank you. She stood up and shook his hand and walked out through the waiting room with the real plants and the small paper cups, and she sat in her car in the parking lot for 6 minutes, which she knew because she watched the clock. Then she started the car. She drove to the garden center on the edge of the city, the one she went to with Helen sometimes, the one that smelled like peat and water. She walked through the greenhouse section and looked at the plants without buying anything. She picked up a small terracotta pot and held it and set it back down. She thought about roots. She thought about how you could transplant something that had grown in one place, moved it carefully, keep the roots intact, and it would survive the move. It would take time to settle. It might drop some leaves, but it would survive. She bought a small plant she didn't know the name of. Something with dark leaves and a determined quality about it, like it had decided to grow, and nothing was going to argue with it about that. She drove home. In the kitchen, Patricia was making bread. The house smelled like warm flour and thyme. Nadia set the plant on the kitchen windowsill. Patricia looked at it and then at her. Well, Patricia said. Everything I thought, Nadia said. Patricia nodded. She went back to the bread. Her hands pressed and folded and turned with a steadiness that made Nadia think of the word reliable, the real meaning of it, not the polite meaning but the deep one. This is something that will not fail you. I need to find a lawyer, Nadia said, a good one, discreet. Patricia said, I have a name. Of course she did. Nadia sat down at the kitchen table. The plant on the windowsill caught the afternoon light, and its dark leaves went almost green. There are going to be people who say things about me, Nadia said. When this is over, things that are not kind. Yes, Patricia said. I need to be ready for that. Are you? Nadia thought about it. She thought about it honestly, turning the question over the way you turn a stone to see what is underneath. Not completely, she said, but I'm getting there. Patricia put the bread in the oven. She set the timer. She sat down across from Nadia at the kitchen table, which she had never done before, and she looked at her with the eyes of a woman who had worked in this house for 22 years and had seen things that never got spoken. You know, she said, in all the time I've been in this house, you are the first person I have seen sit at this table and actually look at the window. Nadia looked at the window, the plant, the afternoon light, the garden beyond. Most people, Patricia said, only look at what's in front of them. I'm trying to look further than that, Nadia said. Patricia nodded. She picked up her tea. They sat together in the warm kitchen, and the bread rose in the oven, and outside the old oak trees stood in their row, and the light moved across the garden the way it always did at 4 in the afternoon, slow and golden and unhurried, like it had nowhere else to be. Nadia opened her notebook. She wrote, "Today is the day I stopped asking permission to see clearly. Everything I do from here is mine." She underlined it. Not because she was dramatic, because she needed to remember. Outside the kitchen window, one of the oak leaves let go of its branch and came down slowly, spinning once, and landed on the garden path. Nadia watched it. She thought, when it's time it goes, you don't have to force it, you just have to be ready to go. She was not ready yet, but she was close. She could feel close. The lawyer's name was Caroline Marsh, and she operated out of a small office above a bookshop on a side street. Nadia had never been down before. Patricia had given her the name on a Thursday, and by the following Monday Nadia was sitting in the stairwell outside the bookshop with her coat buttoned to the collar, holding a folder that contained 2 things: the doctor's certified report and a handwritten list of questions she had written at midnight and revised twice before she was satisfied with the order of them. She had not told anyone where she was going. She had told the house she was visiting Helen, her landscape tutor. She had driven herself, which she did rarely but which nobody thought to question, because the alternative was a driver who was employed by the house, and who, however quietly, reported to the house. The bookshop smelled like old paper and something faintly sweet she couldn't identify. She went up the stairs. The door at the top had a small frosted glass panel, and behind it a light was on. She knocked. Caroline Marsh was 41, with short gray hair she wore without any apparent concern for its grayness, and reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she had not put on yet. She stood up when Nadia entered and shook her hand firmly and said, "Sit down, please. Would you like water?" Nadia said yes to the water because she always said yes to water. It gave her hands something to do. The office was tidy in the way of someone who actually uses their desk rather than decorating it. There were files everywhere, but they were labeled and stacked. The window looked out onto the side street where someone had put a small potted tree on the pavement, and the tree was doing its best. "You were referred to me by Patricia Callahan," Caroline said. "Yes, she's a good judge of people." "She is." Caroline folded her hands on the desk. She had the particular quality that the best people in any professional field tend to have, a quality of giving you their full attention not as a performance but as a simple fact. She was here in this room looking at Nadia and nowhere else. "Tell me what you need," she said. Nadia placed the folder on the desk. "I need to know how to leave a marriage," she said, "in a way that protects a child who is not yet born, and that does not give the other party time to prepare a response that dismantles everything before I have a chance to speak." Caroline looked at the folder without touching it. "And the other party," she said, "is Cale Draven." If the name registered as anything other than a name, Caroline's face did not show it. She picked up the folder and opened it and read the doctor's report, and set it back down with the same care with which Nadia had placed it there. "Is the child's father someone you are able to name?" she said. "He is someone I trust," Nadia said. "I am not yet ready to name him formally." "That's fine for now. We can work around that in the initial filing." Caroline picked up a pen. "You said you want to protect the child before you want anything else." "Yes, not the financial settlement, not the reputational position, the child first." "The child first," Nadia said, "everything else after." Caroline wrote something, then she looked up. The Draven family will move quickly once this is initiated, she said. They have resources that are considerable. You understand that the moment those papers are filed, or the moment they are delivered, however you choose to do it, the clock starts and it does not stop. I know. They will try to control the story. I know that too. They will probably try to discredit you. Yes. And the child's parentage will be something they use. Nadia looked at the window. The small potted tree on the pavement outside was moving slightly in the wind, just its upper branches just a little. Let them use it, she said. The truth doesn't change based on who is telling it. Caroline studied her for a moment. People in your position usually come to me with a great deal of fear, she said. You have some, I can see that. But it's not running you. Nadia said, the fear was running me for 4 years. I've been waiting for it to slow down enough for me to pass it. Caroline looked at her for another moment, then she nodded once and picked up her pen again, and they spent the next hour going through everything. The structure of the land trust merger and how the marriage had been used to bind it. The existing prenuptial agreement, which Leonard Hargrove had signed on Nadia's behalf because she had been 23 and not yet understood what that meant. The various assets that were technically shared by virtue of residence. The question of the child, the documentation, the certified medical report. Nadia answered every question precisely. She had been preparing for this conversation in her head for weeks without knowing she was preparing for it. Every night she had laid in the dark and sorted through facts the way you sort through a drawer, putting things in the right place, knowing where to find them. By the time they finished, it was past noon. Caroline closed her notepad. Give me 2 weeks, she said. I'll have a draft filing ready. You review it, we adjust, and then you decide when and how you want it delivered. Nadia nodded. One more thing, Caroline said. Is there anyone inside the house who you trust? Someone who knows your movements, your schedule, someone who might. Patricia, Nadia said immediately. Only Patricia. Is she discreet? She's been keeping this family's secrets for 22 years. The difference now is that she's keeping mine. Caroline allowed a small smile. It was the first expression that had crossed her face that wasn't entirely professional. All right, she said, we'll be in touch. Nadia stood. She put her coat back on and picked up the folder. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Caroline said. Thank me when it's done. Nadia walked down the stairs and through the bookshop and back out onto the side street. She stood for a moment next to the small potted tree. It was thin and a little uneven, growing toward the light the way things in tight spaces do. She put one hand on its trunk briefly. Then she walked to her car and drove home. On the way, she stopped at a pharmacy she had never used before, in a neighborhood she didn't usually pass through, and she bought a plain notebook with a gray cover and a black pen. She paid with cash she had been keeping in the inside pocket of her coat for 3 weeks, because she had read enough and paid enough attention to know that receipts were a kind of trail. She was thinking about trails now, what she was leaving and what she was not. That evening she sat at the kitchen table while Patricia finished washing up, and she opened the gray notebook and she wrote everything down. The name of the lawyer, the address above the bookshop, the questions she had asked and the answers she had received, the 2-week timeline. What she had been told about the clock and the story and the assets. She wrote it in a handwriting she rarely used, a smaller, neater version of her own, and she wrote it without abbreviation because she did not want to come back and not understand herself. Then she put the notebook in the bottom of her landscape design bag, underneath her drafting tools and a rolled-up site plan she had been working on for months, which was exactly the kind of place where no one would look for anything important. She had been thinking in those weeks about the shape of her life as a before and an after. Before the signing, before the blue dress, before the sitting room and Lyra's hand and the orange light on the curtain. And now the after, which had not quite started yet, but which was beginning to have a shape. It was small and uncertain, but it was there, the way the beginning of a road is there before you can see where it goes. She thought about Elian. She had not let herself think about him properly since the bathroom floor. Thinking about him properly was something she had been rationing, the way you ration the thing you most want when you are not yet in a place where you can have it freely. She had seen him twice in the past year. Once at a charity event for a hospital foundation, The kind of event where everyone is dressed well and standing with drinks and talking about things that matter just enough to be there without mattering enough to be uncomfortable. She had been across the room. He had been near the bar. She had looked up and he had been looking at her, and for a moment the room had simply been too loud for everything except that. She had gone to find him. She had not planned to. Her feet had simply started moving. They had stood near a window and talked for 40 minutes, and she had learned that he was working in landscape architecture now, which had made her laugh out loud for the first time in she couldn't remember how long, because she was studying landscape design and she had not known that, and the world was small and strange and full of circles. He had said, "You look like you're holding something heavy." She had said, "I'm always holding something heavy." He had said, "I know." I could tell even from across the room. She had wanted to tell him everything then. She hadn't. Not because she didn't trust him. She trusted him in the oldest way, the way you trust something that was true before you were old enough to be strategic about it. But because it wasn't time yet, because she wasn't ready, because some things need to be built up too, not said at charity events near windows with people walking past. They had exchanged numbers. She had saved his under a different name. The second time was 4 months later, at a landscape design conference she had attended with Helen. He had been there giving a presentation about urban green spaces, and she had sat in the third row and watched him talk for 50 minutes and thought, he is exactly who he always was. That is rare. That is the rarest thing. Afterward they had coffee in the conference center lobby and talked for 2 hours, and something had shifted between them in the way that things shift when you stop pretending they haven't already shifted. She had not planned anything. Neither had he. But by the end of the 2 hours they had both said things that were too true to unsay, and the shape of what was between them had become something that could not be filed back into the category of old friends who ran into each other at events. The baby was real. Elian was real. And Nadia, sitting in her kitchen on a Wednesday evening with a gray notebook and a black pen and 2 weeks until the first draft of a divorce filing would be ready, was deciding to be real too. She had spent 4 years being a decoration, a front door, a piece of furniture adjusted to the shape of whatever room she was placed in. She was done being adjusted. She thought about the doctor's office, the plant in the waiting room, the real one. She thought about Leonard with the warm eyes and the steady hands and the careful sentence. The child's type is not possible given Cale Draven's documented type. The child. Hers. She put one hand flat on the table. She thought about what Cale would do when she told him. She thought about it with the clear, practical part of her mind, the part that had been growing sharper over these months, the part that had been reading things and paying attention to things and preparing without anyone knowing she was preparing. He would deny it first. That would be his first move, not because he would be surprised. She suspected he already suspected something, the way people in long silences come to understand things without speaking them, but because denying it was the strategic move. It bought time. It shifted the story onto her. Then he would try to control the narrative. He would call the lawyers. He would call the people on the council who owed him favors. He would call Lyra probably because Lyra was smart and had been navigating his world for longer than Nadia had, and she would know what to do. And then they would all sit in rooms and decide what the story was. Nadia thought, but the story is already what it is. The doctor's report is already what it is. The signed marriage documents and the land trust merger and the prenuptial agreement are already what they are. You can sit in as many rooms as you like and decide what to call things, but the things themselves do not change based on what you call them. She opened the gray notebook again and wrote one more sentence. She wrote, "He is very good at controlling rooms. I am going to have to be better at controlling the ground we stand on." She closed the notebook. She put it back in the landscape bag. She went upstairs and brushed her teeth and went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about what the first day of the after would feel like when it finally came. Outside, the wind moved through the oaks. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. The baby, small and real and entirely hers, was exactly 9.5 weeks old. Nadia lay in the dark and breathed. She thought 12 more days until the draft. She counted the ceiling. She waited. She called him on a Tuesday, which was the day Helen came for landscape design, which meant the house already expected her to be occupied and vaguely distracted in her study with drawings spread across the floor. Helen had left at 3:30. Nadia had stood by the window for several minutes after she heard the car leave. Then she had taken out her phone and found the name she had saved him under. Elian was saved as E. Cole Landscape Referral, which was both true and untrue in the way that the best covers always are, and she had pressed call before she had finished deciding whether she was going to. It rang twice. Nadia, he said. Just that, her name, not hello, not a question. Just her name, the way you say the name of something you have been expecting. She sat down on the edge of the desk. Hi, she said. Is everything okay? It's complicated. A pause, not a long one. All right. I need to talk to you, not on the phone. I need to see you. He said, tell me where and I'll be there. She had expected more questions, or at least a pause while he calibrated. But that was the thing about Elian. She was remembering it now, the thing she had forgotten because she had spent 4 years around someone who processed everything through a filter of consequence and strategy. Elian just said yes and then showed up. It was so simple it felt almost incomprehensible. They arranged to meet the following Thursday, at a small gallery in the east quarter of the city that Helen had mentioned once as somewhere she liked to go because it was always quiet on Thursdays, and the owner made terrible coffee that Elian would hate, Nadia thought, but he would drink anyway without complaining. In the days between the call and the Thursday, she did what she had become good at doing, which was continuing. She attended a lunch. She responded to a query from the household accounts manager about a catering invoice. She sat across from Cale at dinner on Wednesday evening, and he said, how was your week? And she said, busy, quiet, and he said, and looked at his phone, and that was dinner. She thought, in some other version of this life I feel sorry for us. Not for me, for the shape of it, for what this was supposed to be and what it became instead. But she did not feel sorry in this version. In this version, she was 12 days from a completed draft filing and sitting across from a man who had never looked at her properly and thinking, almost. The gallery on Thursday had 3 rooms. The current exhibition was photographs of coastlines, large format prints of cliffs and water, and the kind of sky that makes you understand why people used to think they could sail off the edge of the world. Nadia arrived first and stood in front of a photograph of a beach in Scotland, all grey water and light, and she thought, somewhere that does not look anything like here. Elian arrived 7 minutes later with his coat collar up against the cold, and his hair damp from the weather outside, and he spotted her immediately and crossed the room without pausing. He said, you look like you haven't slept properly in months. That's your opening, she said. I'm not going to start by talking about the weather when you look like that. She turned back to the photograph. It's a beach in Scotland. It looks cold. It looks free, she said. He stood beside her, close, but not the kind of close that announces itself. The kind that is simply the natural distance between two people who have known each other a long time. How bad is it? He said. I'm leaving him, she said. I have a lawyer. I have a filing almost ready. I'm going to give him the papers in the next few weeks when I've decided exactly how. Elian was quiet. There's something else, she said. She looked at the photograph instead of him when she said it, because she needed the steadiness of the grey water while the words came out. I'm pregnant, she said. The child is yours. The gallery was very quiet. Somewhere in the next room, another visitor's shoes made a soft sound on the floor. Nadia looked at the cliff in the photograph. It was made of dark rock and the sea was below it, and the sky above it was almost white, and the whole thing had a quality of enduring, of having been exactly like that for a very long time and expecting to go on being like that. Elian said, okay. She turned to look at him. Okay, she said. Yes, he said. He was looking at her, not past her, not at the photograph, at her. Okay, I'm here, what do you need? She had prepared for many possible responses. She had run through them in the dark for the past 2 weeks. She had prepared for complicated. She had prepared for questions, for hesitation, for the specific kind of panic that enters a person's face when the consequence of something becomes suddenly real. She had not prepared for okay. She said, you're not scared. Of course I'm scared, he said. I'm terrified, but being terrified and being here are 2 different things and I can do both. Nadia looked at him for a long time. She said, "I've been so careful about not hoping for too much." "I know," he said. "I can tell, but you don't have to be careful about that with me." She looked back at the photograph. The gray water, the white sky. "The Draven family is going to try to take this apart," she said. "When the papers are filed, they're going to go after everything. My character, the child's parentage, all of it. I know. It could get very public. I know. And ugly." "Nadia," his voice was quiet and steady. "I've been watching you from the side of rooms for 4 years. I've been trying not to interfere with a life I had no right to interfere with. I am not going anywhere now. I don't care what they say or what it looks like. Tell me what you need." She put her hands in her pockets. "I need you not to make any sudden moves," she said. "Not yet. I need everything to look exactly the same on the outside for a few more weeks while I get everything in order." "Can you do that?" "Yes. I need you to not contact me except on the number I gave you, and only on Tuesdays and Thursdays because those are the days I'm usually out, and it's less likely to be noticed." "Yes. And I need you to be patient." "I've been patient for 4 years," he said. "A few more weeks is nothing." They stood in front of the Scottish beach for another few minutes. The gallery owner, somewhere behind them, was rearranging something on a shelf. Then Elian said, "There's something I want to tell you. I don't know if it helps or makes it worse." She looked at him. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said. "Not once in 4 years. I thought about you in the way you think about something you got wrong and can't go back and fix. I told myself I should move on, that I had no right to hold onto something that wasn't mine anymore. But I couldn't make myself stop." Nadia said nothing. "I'm not saying that to add weight to this," he said. "I'm saying it so you know that when I say I'm here, I mean the full version of here, not just for now." She looked at the gray water in the photograph. She thought about Elian at 24 with the crooked teeth, and the terrible hat who called her Nadia with 2 A's, because he said she deserved both of them. She thought about her father in the chair by the window. She thought about all the distance between those two things, and everything that had lived in that distance. She said, "I used to write things in a notebook, small things I noticed. And for years I wouldn't write what I actually felt, because I was afraid that if I named it, I would have to do something about it." "And now," he said. "Now I'm writing everything," she said. "Now I write it in the dark in the smallest handwriting I have, in a gray notebook I keep hidden in a bag, and I don't leave anything out." Elian looked at her. "Then you're already almost there," he said. She almost smiled. It was not quite a full smile, but it was closer than anything had been for a long time. "Almost," she said. They had the gallery's terrible coffee, which Elian drank without complaint, and they stayed for another 40 minutes talking about practical things. The timeline, the lawyer's draft, what would happen after the papers were filed, what Elian's schedule looked like, and what flexibility he had. It was the kind of conversation that feels very ordinary on the surface, and underneath, it is the most important conversation you have ever had. When she left, she drove back through the city in the pale gray light of an autumn afternoon, and thought about the photograph in the gallery, the cliff and the sea and the white sky. She thought, somewhere that does not look like here. She thought, we'll get there. She thought about the child, real and small and growing, and she thought about the way Elian had said okay, and the way the word had landed in her chest like something she had needed to hear for a very long time without knowing what shape it would take when it arrived. She drove home, she parked, she sat in the car for 3 minutes and just breathed. Then she went inside and she hung up her coat and she walked to the kitchen, and Patricia was there, and Patricia looked at her and said, "Well." Nadia said, "I told him." Patricia nodded. She picked up the kettle. And she said, "He said okay," Nadia said. Patricia filled the kettle. "Good man," she said. Nadia sat down at the table. "I need to see Caroline again," she said. "I need to talk to her about timing." "I'll send a message through her office," Patricia said. "Don't use the house line." "Obviously not." The kettle went on. The kitchen smelled like earlier bread, the ghost of it, the warmth that stays in a room long after the thing itself is gone. Nadia opened her landscape bag and took out the gray notebook and a pen, and she sat at the table and wrote. Told him today. He said okay. I believe him. That is the thing I have been most afraid of, believing someone again. But I think this is different because he doesn't make me believe him. He just shows up and is what he says he is. I had forgotten that was possible. She stopped writing and looked at what she had written. She thought about possibility. The word had felt small to her for years. Not impossible, but small, contained, the kind of possible that has reasonable limits. She wrote, I think I'm learning that possible is bigger than I let myself imagine it could be. She closed the notebook. 2 weeks later, on a morning that was cold and clear, and the sky above the oak trees was the particular blue that comes only in late autumn when the air is dry, Caroline's office sent through a message via Patricia's contact. The draft is ready. Nadia read the message in her bedroom, alone. She put the phone face down on the duvet. She sat still for 60 seconds and let the weight of it settle, the way you let something settle when it is about to become real. Then she picked up the phone and sent back, good, when can we meet? The response came, tomorrow, 11. She wrote back, I'll be there. She put the phone in her pocket and went to the window and stood looking out at the oak trees. The leaves were almost all down now. The branches were bare and black against the blue sky, and they were, she thought, the most honest thing she had seen in a long time. No covering, no decoration, just the tree exactly what it was. She went downstairs and sat in the kitchen with Patricia, and they had tea and said very little, because some things do not need to be spoken to be shared between two people who have sat at the same kitchen table often enough to understand each other. And tomorrow she would see Caroline, and the papers would take their final shape, and the clock that Caroline had mentioned would begin to wind up. And then, outside the oak trees stood in their row, bare and patient and not going anywhere. Nadia drank her tea. Caroline Marsh's office above the bookshop was exactly as Nadia had left it, tidy in the way of someone who actually works, plants on the windowsill, files stacked with purpose, the small potted tree on the pavement outside carrying on with its life. Nadia arrived at 11:05. She had been in the city since 9, had walked for an hour through the Riverside district because she could not sit still that morning and needed something to do with her body that was not pacing the bedroom. The river had been low and gray, and a handful of birds were working along the bank with the purposeful efficiency of creatures who had no time for hesitation. She had thought that is what today is, no hesitation. She went up the stairs, she knocked, she sat down. Caroline had the draft on the desk between them, printed and clean, 22 pages with numbered sections, and the particular dry language of legal documents that makes the largest things in a person's life sound like administrative matters. Read it first, Caroline said. Take your time, I'll answer questions after. Nadia read it. It took 40 minutes. She read every sentence twice, the way she had read the notes in her gray notebook, the way she read everything now, not for comfort but for precision, for the exact meaning of every word. She had a pen in her hand and she made small marks in the margin wherever she had a question. She had 7 questions. Caroline answered them all. 3 of the questions required small adjustments to the language. Caroline noted them and said she could have the final version by Friday. The other 4 questions were about process, the order of events, what would happen when the papers were served, how quickly Cale's legal team would move, what protections were already built into the filing. I want to give it to him myself, Nadia said. Caroline looked up. Most people choose a formal service of process. I know, I want to do it myself. Can I ask why? Nadia thought about it. It was a fair question. It deserved a real answer, not a surface one. Because he has had 4 years of the arrangement being a thing that was done to me, she said. The signing the house, the management of the story, all of it, things arranged by other people that landed on me. I want this to be mine. I want to hand it to him with my own hands so that when it's over, when all of it is over, the thing I remember is that I did it, not that it was done to me. Caroline was quiet for a moment. All right, she said, you give it to him. I want the certified medical report to be part of what he sees, but not filed in the initial documents. I want the lawyer's correspondence to make clear that it exists without submitting it publicly yet. I need him to know that I have it, but I don't need to use it unless I have to. You want it as leverage, not as ammunition. I want it as truth, Nadia said. Ammunition is for people who want to win. I just want to get out. Caroline looked at her for a long moment. You know, she said, most clients who sit across from me in a situation like yours are thinking about how to make the other person hurt as much as they've been hurt. You're thinking about something else. I've been thinking about the child, Nadia said. If I turn this into a war, the child lives inside a war. I'm not interested in a war, I'm interested in a door. Caroline nodded. She picked up the draft. Friday, she said, I'll have the final version and then you decide when. Nadia stood. She picked up her coat. She said, Caroline. Yes. When this is over, whatever happens, I want you to know that I hired you because you were the right person, not just the discreet person. The right one. Caroline said, get through it first, then you can flatter me. Nadia went down the stairs. She stood outside on the pavement next to the small potted tree and she looked at it for a moment. It was still doing its best. It had not grown noticeably since the first time she had stood beside it, but it was still there and still growing, and that was the thing that mattered. She walked to a cafe 2 streets over that she had never been to before and she ordered coffee and a piece of toast, and she sat at a small table by the window and she ate slowly and watched the street and thought about nothing in particular, just the people going past, a woman with a red scarf, a man walking 2 dogs who had decided they wanted to go in different directions, a delivery driver checking a screen with the expression of someone who has been given too many packages and not enough time. All of them had things. All of them had the weight of their own lives, which from the outside looked like just people going somewhere, but from the inside were full of rooms and promises and fears and things they were carrying that you couldn't see. She thought, everyone is doing this, everyone is holding something. You don't know which of the people walking past you are in the middle of the biggest decision of their lives. You can't tell from the outside. She finished her coffee. She did not linger. She walked back to her car and drove home, and the rest of the afternoon was ordinary. She called Helen about the next Tuesday session. She replied to a household query. She sat with her landscape drawings for an hour and actually worked on them because she genuinely liked doing it, and she was good at it, and that was allowed. She was allowed to be good at things and to like them. She was learning slowly to give herself that. Friday came. She collected the final document from Caroline's office, this time via a sealed envelope delivered to Patricia's home address, because by now they were being careful in every direction. She sat on the edge of her bed that Friday evening with the envelope in her hands and did not open it. She already knew what was in it. She had read every word of the draft. The final version was clean and precise and said exactly what it needed to say. She held it. She thought about what she was holding, not the papers specifically, but the weight of the decision, the particular weight of choosing yourself after years of not having been chosen. It was a different kind of heavy than the weight she had been carrying. This one had direction. It was going somewhere. She put the envelope in the inner pocket of the coat she had decided to wear. The coat she had bought for herself 2 years ago, not selected by a stylist or approved by anyone, just bought because she had walked past a shop on a cold afternoon and seen it in the window and thought, that is the color of things that last. Dark green. The color of oak leaves in early summer before they dry out and fall. She zipped the inner pocket. She hung the coat on the hook by her door. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and she thought, tomorrow I could do it, or the day after, or the day after that. I will know when it is time. There is no precise date on a document like this. There is only the moment when you are ready. She thought about the morning she had stood on the bathroom floor. She thought about Patricia's kitchen. She thought about Elian saying okay. She thought about Caroline saying get through it first. She thought about the child, real and small, growing in the dark inside her the way all real things grow before they are ready to be seen. She pressed one hand flat on her stomach. She said quietly into the ceiling, we're almost at the door. She closed her eyes. Outside the oak trees were bare and black, and the November wind was moving through them and making its sound, the low, persistent sound of air through bare branches, which is different from the sound through full-leafed summer ones. It is less full but more honest. You can hear the wind itself. She listened to it. She thought in a few days, maybe 3, maybe 5. I will know. She let herself fall asleep without deciding, and that was the most restful sleep she had in months. And on the following Tuesday, at 7 minutes past 11 in the morning, she went to the kitchen and found Patricia and said, "Tonight." Patricia looked at her. "Are you ready?" she said. Nadia thought about it honestly. "I think ready is the wrong word for it," she said. "I think the right word is decided." Patricia poured her tea without a word. Nadia drank it. At 11 minutes past midnight, she walked into Cale's study with the folded papers in her hand and set them on top of his territorial maps and waited for him to look up. But that is not where the story ends. Because the moment she set those papers down was not the ending, it was the floor, the thing that everything else was going to be built on from this point forward. And what happened in that room, what Cale said and what Nadia answered, and what the silence between those words contained, that was something else entirely. That was where the real story began. Cale Draven had never looked small in a room. It was one of the things she had noticed about him from the very beginning, from that first courtroom morning with the notary and the lawyers and the expensive soap. He had a quality of taking up space without effort, the way certain buildings do, the ones that were designed to remind you of something, not threatening, just present in the full sense of the word, every part of his body aware of where he was and who was watching. But when she set the papers on his desk, something in the way he was sitting changed. It was subtle, she would have missed it 6 months ago. But she had been watching things carefully for a long time now, and she knew the language of his body the way you know the sound of a house at night, all its small shifts and signals. He set down his pen. He looked at the papers without touching them. And then he looked at her. "What is this?" he said. His voice was level, controlled. She had expected that. "Divorce filing," she said. "You have 14 days to retain legal representation and respond through the formal channels. Caroline Marsh is my attorney. Her contact details are on the cover page." Cale was quiet. She had also expected that. He looked back at the papers. He still had not touched them. "Sit down," he said. "I'd prefer to stand." He looked up at her again. She had never refused to sit when he told her to sit before. It was a small thing. It landed in the room like something much larger. "Nadia," he said. "The filing is straightforward," she said. "It's clean. I'm not asking for anything except what is reasonable, and Caroline has been very precise about what reasonable means, which is less than what I could ask for. I want the child protected. I want an agreed settlement on the residential matter. I want the arrangement ended cleanly." "The child," he said. She waited. "The child," he said again, and his voice for the first time had something in it beneath the control. She could not have named the something precisely. It was not anger, not yet. It was more like the sound a door makes when the frame has shifted and it no longer fits quite right. A small grinding, a resistance. "The child is mine," she said, "legally and otherwise. You know what I mean." "Yes," she said, "I know exactly what you mean." She had prepared for this. She had played this conversation in every direction, every branch of it, for weeks. She had known that this would be the point where he would want her to feel something that reduced her, shame or fear or the specific kind of guilt that women are taught to carry when they have done something that makes a complicated situation more complicated. She had also known that she did not feel any of those things. She had examined herself for them carefully, the way you check a wound, and they were not there. What was there was clarity. "There is a certified medical report," she said, "that is currently held by Caroline and is not part of the initial filing. It exists. Its contents are what you would expect. Whether it becomes part of any further proceedings is something that will depend entirely on how cleanly this can be resolved." Cale looked at her. "Are you threatening me?" he said. "No," she said. "I'm telling you the truth about what exists. The difference between a threat and the truth is that the truth doesn't change based on how you respond to it." The room was very quiet. On his desk, beside the territorial maps and the papers, a candle in a glass holder had been burning. The wax had pooled in a perfect shallow circle. She noticed it because she noticed things now, all the small physical facts of rooms, the way the floor held the cold, the way the candlelight threw orange warmth up one side of his face and left the other in shadow. Cale picked up the divorce papers. He held them for a moment, not reading them, just holding them the way you hold something when you are deciding what it weighs. Then he set them back down. You've been planning this, he said. Yes. For how long? Long enough to do it properly. He was quiet again. She could see him thinking, not with confusion but with the precision of someone who has spent a career making calculations quickly, and who was now running a calculation that had more variables than he preferred. Then he said, Lyra. She said nothing. This is about Lyra, he said, and you want to what, punish me for something that… This is not about Lyra, Nadia said. Her voice was very calm. She had not expected it to come out that calm. This is about 4 years of a marriage that was never a choice I made, and about the fact that I have made a choice now, a real one. Lyra is a separate matter. I'm not angry at Lyra. You're not angry at her. I told you once what I am angry at, she said. I'm angry at a room full of people who made a decision about my life and then expected me to perform gratitude for it. Lyra didn't make that decision. My father made it. You agreed to it. Those are the people responsible for what this became. Cale looked at her. He looked at her in a way he had not looked at her before. Not the brief painting on a wall look, not the courteous nothing of 4 years of dinners and good mornings. He looked at her the way you look at something when you suddenly realize it is much more than you had assessed it to be. She thought too late for that. She said 14 days. Caroline's number is on the page. She turned to leave. Nadia. She stopped, did not turn back. Were you ever content here, at any point? She thought about the kitchen. She thought about Patricia's bread and the warm smell of flour. She thought about the oak trees and her morning walks and the landscape design drawings spread across the floor and the gray notebook, and what she wrote in it at midnight when the truth would not wait any longer. I made a life inside the one I was given, she said. That's different from content. She walked out. The corridor was dark and long, and her footsteps were very quiet on the cold marble floor, and she walked its full length without looking back, and behind her the study door did not open, and Cale did not follow, and the house was silent all the way around her like held breath. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. And then quietly, with no one watching, she let out the breath she had been holding for 4 years. It took a while. When it was done, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, that's the floor. Everything builds from here. She did not sleep that night. Not because she was afraid or in pain, but because her mind was moving too fast, too many things resolving and shifting and settling into new places. It was not an unpleasant kind of wakefulness. It felt like the thing you feel at the end of a very long journey when you have finally reached the right exit and you pull over and look at where you are. You look and you breathe, and the journey is still in your body, all the miles of it, but you have arrived. She watched the sky outside her window go from deep black to gray, then to the particular pale blue of early morning. At 6:30 she got up. She dressed. She went to the kitchen. Patricia was already there. Neither of them said anything for a long moment, then Patricia put the kettle on. How did he take it? She said. He stayed in his chair, Nadia said, which is exactly what I expected. Patricia made the tea. They sat. It will be loud soon, Nadia said. Yes. His people will make calls today, probably already have if he called Lyra last night. Probably. Nadia wrapped her hands around the mug. I want to be gone before it gets loud, she said. Not running, just not inside the noise when it starts. I want to be somewhere quiet while they arrange themselves. Patricia looked at her. I've been thinking, Nadia said, about where I want to go. Somewhere Elian is, Patricia said. It was not a question. Nadia looked at her. I told you about him. You didn't have to, Patricia said. You don't sit like that when you've been to see your landscape tutor. You sit like that when you've been somewhere that matters. Nadia almost smiled. His flat is in the south quarter, she said. He has a spare room. We already talked about it when the time came. That's practical, Patricia said. He is practical, Nadia said, in a way that doesn't feel cold. It just feels like having ground under you. Patricia drank her tea. The house is going to feel it when you go, she said. Not emotionally, practically. You've been managing more of it than people realize. The household accounts manager knows where everything is, Nadia said. I spent 3 months making sure of that, not for Kale, for the people here, the ones who work here. I didn't want to leave a mess for them. Patricia looked at her over the rim of the mug with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to understand that the true character of a person is found in the things they do when no one is going to thank them for it. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Nadia finished her tea and stood up and went upstairs and began to pack. Not everything, not dramatically. One bag, the things that were hers, the grey notebook, the landscape drawings, the clothes she had bought for herself and not for the role of being anyone's wife, the small potted plant she had put on the kitchen windowsill on the day she came back from the garden center. That one she carried down to the kitchen and left on the table. For Patricia, the council had 7 members. By 9 o'clock that morning, Kale had spoken to 4 of them. Nadia knew this not because she was listening, not because she had anyone on the inside of those calls, but because she had watched Kale operate for 4 years, and she understood the order in which he moved when something threatened the structure of what he had built. First the lawyers, that would have been last night, within the hour of her walking out of the study. Then the inner circle of the council, the ones who were bound to him by interest rather than just courtesy, the ones who had a stake in the Draven name remaining exactly what it was. By the time she walked out of the house with her one bag on her shoulder and the landscape design folder under her arm, the machinery was already turning. She drove away from the estate without looking in the rearview mirror. She drove for 15 minutes, and then she pulled over in a side street lined with trees that still had a few last leaves on them, and she called Caroline. "They've started," she said. "I received a call from a member of the Draven legal team at 8:47 this morning," Caroline said. She sounded exactly the same as she always sounded, even precise, already in motion. "They're proposing a mediated settlement, private, confidential. They want to handle it without formal filing." "That's not an option," Nadia said. "I know. I told them as much." "What was their response?" "They said they would need to speak with their client." Nadia looked at the last leaves on the tree. "They want the medical report buried." Yes, the early overture toward a private settlement, without formal filing, without a public record, that's what they're moving toward. If it's settled privately, you have protections, but they're much softer than the formal route. And the medical report becomes a document that exists only in private correspondence. "I don't want it buried," Nadia said. "I want it to be real. I want a real filing that creates a real record, because if there's no record, then in 5 years someone can tell a story about what happened and the truth has nowhere to stand." "Then we proceed as filed," Caroline said. "Proceed as filed." "There will be pressure, Nadia, from multiple directions." "I'm aware. Your father may be contacted." The familiar cold that always came when she thought about Leonard Hargrove moved briefly across her chest. "My father has no legal standing in this," she said. "No, but he has influence over you that they may try to use." "He had influence over me when I was 23 and didn't have anywhere to stand," she said. "I have somewhere to stand now." "All right," Caroline said. "Then I'll send them a formal response today. I'll make it clear that we are proceeding and that any further communication should come through legal channels." "Thank you," Nadia said. "Where are you?" Caroline said. "In a car pulling away." "Good, stay moving for now. I'll call you this afternoon." Nadia ended the call and sat for a moment in the parked car with her hands in her lap. She thought about her father sitting in the chair by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. She thought about all the things she had not said in that room, all the objections she had folded up and put away because she was 23 and did not yet understand that having no options and choosing not to fight were not the same thing. She was not 23 anymore. She was 27, and she was in a parked car on a side street with a one-bag life and a filing in motion and a child growing inside her and a plan. An actual plan, not the plan that someone else had drawn up around her name, but one she had built herself slowly in the dark, in the smallest handwriting she had. She started the car. She drove to the South Quarter. Elian's building was a converted industrial block that had been turned into flats in the way that buildings like it often are, all exposed brick and large windows, and a lift that made a sound like it was considering the situation. Nadia parked and buzzed, and he let her in without asking any questions. which was the right thing to do. She went up. His flat was exactly what she had expected, which was the kind of flat a person has when they are honest about who they are. Big worktable covered in drawings, shelves of books that were actually read rather than displayed, a kitchen with evidence of actual cooking rather than the ghost of it, a spider plant on the windowsill that needed water and was going to get it soon. He was standing in the kitchen doorway when she came in. She put down her bag. She said, "I did it." He said, "I know, I heard it in your voice when you buzzed in." She looked at the room, at the drawings on the work table, at the spider plant. She said, "This is very small compared to what I left." "Yes," he said. "It's better," she said. He did not argue with this. He stepped back from the doorway and she went into the kitchen and sat down at his kitchen table, which was wood and old and had a ring mark on one corner from years of mugs, and he put the kettle on and they sat in the small warm kitchen, and outside the south quarter was going about its morning, bus sounds and voices, and the particular urban hum of a city that has no idea what has just changed in one woman's life. "His lawyers have already called my lawyer," she said. "What do they want?" "To make it private, to make it quiet." "Will it be quiet?" "Not if I'm asking for the right things in the right way," she said. "I'd rather it be true." Elian looked at her. He said, "The next few weeks are going to be hard." "I know. People are going to say things." "I know. And some of them will be about the child, and about you, and about this." "Yes. Are you going to be okay?" She thought about the question. She always took his questions seriously, even the short ones, especially the short ones. "I'm going to be scared sometimes," she said, "and exhausted, and there will probably be days when I'm angry in a way that surprises me. But those things are all going to happen inside a life that I chose, and that's different. Being afraid inside a choice you made is completely different from being afraid inside a life that happened to you." Elian was quiet. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what to do about the office." She looked at him. "What about it?" "I'm going to tell them what's happening, not everything, but enough. I don't want to hide it and I don't want to be caught managing it either." "You don't have to do that for me." "I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I'm doing it because I'm not built for pretending. I have never been built for pretending." She thought about that. She thought about how she had spent 4 years pretending, had become very good at pretending, had learned exactly how much of herself to show and how much to fold away. And she thought about what it had cost her, and whether it had saved her anything in return. It had not saved her anything. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, smiling a little. "It's a good word," she said. "I've been borrowing it." The kettle clicked off. He poured the tea. They sat in the small, warm kitchen, and the city moved outside, and the child was 10 weeks old, and the papers were filed, and the clock that Caroline had described was winding up, and the world was going to have opinions about all of it. None of it touched them in that kitchen. Nadia wrapped both hands around the mug. She thought, "This is what ground under you feels like." She thought, "I had forgotten." The story broke on a Friday. It was 7 weeks after the filing. 7 weeks of legal correspondence that Caroline described as intense and predictable. 7 weeks of the Draven side proposing alternatives, and then different alternatives, and then slightly different versions of the same alternatives, all of which amounted to the same thing: do this quietly and make the record disappear. 7 weeks of Nadia saying no. She had been staying with Elian for 2 of those weeks. The first 5 she had spent in a small rented flat on the north side that Patricia had helped her find, plain and quiet, with windows that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had put a bird feeder, and the birds came every morning in reliable rotation, and that had been enough to make the place feel inhabited. She had gone to all her appointments. She had met with Caroline twice a week. She had continued her landscape design course, partly because she wanted to, partly because the steadiness of sitting at a table with drawings and the patient, practical voice of Helen on the phone was the kind of ordinary thing that kept the rest of it from becoming too large. And then Elian had called and said, "The spare room is ready and Patricia's choice of a flat is good, but mine has a better kettle." And she had laughed for real, not the polite kind, and moved her one bag to the south quarter. The Friday it broke, She was at the kitchen table in Alian's flat drinking coffee and reading about urban canopy coverage for an essay she was writing when her phone began to ring in a way that was not the occasional call. It was 4 rings, then 6, then 8. She looked at the screen. 2 journalists, one number she didn't recognize, Caroline. She answered Caroline. "It's in the press," Caroline said. 2 outlets. One of them has most of the facts wrong in ways that favor the Draven narrative. The other one has more of it right and has named the child's parentage as disputed. Nadia set down her coffee. "How?" "I don't know yet. Likely someone inside their legal team or someone on the periphery who was paid well enough to talk. It doesn't matter who. What matters is how we respond." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "We don't respond," she said. "Nadia." "Not yet. What do they actually have? What's in the piece that's closer to accurate?" Caroline told her. The accurate piece had the basic structure of it: the divorce filing, the private settlement negotiations that had not progressed, the medical certification that Cale Draven was not the biological father of the child Nadia was carrying. It had no source named. It was written in the careful but pointed way that journalism uses when it has confirmed enough to print but not everything. "They didn't get that from our side," Nadia said. "No. Which means they got it from his." A pause. "Yes, that's the most likely reading." Nadia stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside the South Quarter was a normal Friday morning. A man on a bicycle, a woman with a pram, a delivery truck with its hazard lights on, blocking the left lane while the driver hauled boxes. "They're controlling the story," she said. "They put it out first so they can shape how it lands." "Yes, if the narrative is set before you say anything, then anything you say becomes a response to their version. And a response always sounds defensive." "Yes." Nadia looked at the delivery driver hauling the boxes. He was working fast, efficient, no wasted movement. "What if I'm not defensive?" she said. "I'm listening." "What if I'm just true, not a press statement, not a response to their framing, just what actually happened in my own voice in a form I control?" Caroline was quiet for a moment. "That's a bigger move," she said. "It changes the shape of everything." "I know. It will draw more attention, not less." "Yes. And the Draven team will respond aggressively if you step into the public record." "Let them," Nadia said. "My record is the same in public as it is in private. I haven't said anything that isn't true and I haven't done anything I need to hide." Another pause. "What are you thinking?" Caroline said. "I'm thinking that if they get to tell the story, I get written into it as a supporting character in my own life. And I have spent enough time as a supporting character." Caroline said, "Give me 24 hours to look at our options. Don't say anything to the press until we've talked." "Agreed," Nadia said. She ended the call. Alian was standing in the doorway. He had heard enough to know. "The press," he said. "Yes. How bad?" "Not as bad as it will be if I let them run with it, but bad enough." He came into the kitchen and poured himself coffee, and then he refilled hers without asking, which she noticed and filed in the same place. She filed everything he did that was quiet and good. "Your name is in it," he said. "Yes. Mine." "Not yet. They call the child's father an unnamed individual, which is their way of leaving room to name you later." Alian nodded. He sat down across from her. "You know I'm not afraid of my name being in it," he said. "I know. I just want to be sure we tell it the same way." "We tell it the only way there is," she said, "the true way." He looked at her. "What does that mean practically?" She picked up her coffee. "It means that I'm going to write something," she said. "Not a press statement, not something that sounds like it came through 6 lawyers. Something in my own voice about who I am and what happened and what I'm doing now. I'm going to let Caroline look at it and then I'm going to put it somewhere that I control. Not a newspaper, not a television interview, something I own. A statement, not quite, more like the truth laid out plainly without apology. The facts of it, who I am, what I was asked to be, what I chose instead." Alian was quiet. "Then can I read it when it's done?" "Yes. Not to approve it, just because I want to know what you say." She looked at him. She thought, that's the difference. He wants to know what I say, not manage it, not position it, just hear it. I'll read it to you, she said. She spent the rest of the day writing it. She sat at Elian's work table with her notebook, and the landscape drawings pushed aside, and she wrote in longhand first, the way she always started, with things that mattered, because writing by hand slowed her down enough to mean every word. She wrote about herself plainly, not in the way of a victim asking to be understood, not in the way of someone seeking sympathy or revenge. She wrote the facts of her life, who she had been and what she had been asked to do and how she had done it and what it had cost and what she had decided and why. She wrote about the child with the particular care of a woman who is choosing to bring something real into a world that is not yet ready to be gentle with it. She wrote about Elian, not his whole history, not more than he had agreed to, just the truth, that there was someone she loved, someone who had been in her life before the arrangement and who was here now, and that the child was his, and that this was not a scandal but simply a life. She did not write about Lyra, not because Lyra was not part of the story, but because Lyra's story was not Nadia's to tell, and she had been very clear with herself about that line. She did not write about Leonard Hargrove with anger. She wrote about him with the particular coolness of someone who has examined a thing from enough distance to see it clearly, which is sometimes the most devastating form of honesty. When she was done, she read it through twice. She read it aloud to Elian that evening, sitting at his kitchen table while the Friday traffic noise came in through the window and the spider plant stood on the sill, still needing water, and he had finally gotten around to watering it earlier that day. She read it all the way through without stopping. When she finished, Elian was quiet. Then he said, "That's everything." "Is it too much?" He thought about it. "It's the right amount of everything," he said. She sent it to Caroline that night. Caroline called at 8 the next morning. "It's good," she said. "It's very good. There are 2 sentences that need to be moved for legal reasons and 1 paragraph where the phrasing could be used against you. Everything else is exactly what it should be." They spent an hour on the phone going through it, and Nadia made the adjustments, and they went through it again. "Where do you want to put it?" Caroline said. "My own account, something I have full control over. No editor, no gate." "Then put it up by noon today," Caroline said, "before the other outlets push another cycle." She did. By 2 in the afternoon, it had been shared more times than she could track. She put her phone face down on the table. She was not watching the numbers. She was not going to watch the numbers. The point of writing it had not been the numbers. The point was that it existed in the world with her name on it, in her own voice, and it was true, every word of it, and no one could change it now. Elian put lunch on the table. She picked up her fork. Outside, the South Quarter was going about its Saturday afternoon. Children somewhere nearby were playing with something that made a high, clear sound. A door opened and closed. A radio played briefly and then was muffled. The world was going on exactly as it always did. Nadia ate her lunch. She thought, I am still here, and the story is mine now. The response came in 3 waves. Nadia had expected 1, perhaps 2. She had not expected 3, or the particular shape of each one, which she found herself studying with the calm, analytical attention of someone who has prepared for a storm and is now watching it arrive and checking it against the forecast. The first wave was the Draven legal team's formal statement, released through a public relations firm the following Monday. It was careful and polished and said very little in a great many words. The divorce proceedings were a private matter. Both parties were committed to a respectful resolution. The facts as stated in the public domain were subject to legal nuance. All relevant matters would be addressed through the proper channels. It said nothing that was untrue. It also said nothing that was true in the way Nadia's statement had been true. It was the language of people managing a situation, rather than the language of people living in one. The press called it a non-response. Nadia called it exactly what it was, a door held closed. The second wave was harder. It came from people she had not expected. Several figures in Kale's social circle, people who had sat at the same tables as her for 4 years and said pleasant things about her hair and her opinions and her work, began to speak to journalists, none of them on record, all of them as a person close to the situation or a source familiar with the family. They said things that were not quite accusations but were shaped like them. Things about Nadia's character, about her motivations. about what kind of woman makes the choices she had made. She read 3 of the articles and then stopped reading them. She called Caroline. "They're running the character angle," she said. "Yes," Caroline said. "I've been watching it develop since yesterday." "Are any of them making claims I need to address legally?" "Not yet, they're staying just inside the line. It's deliberate." "Then I'm not going to respond." "That's my recommendation too," Caroline said. "Responding to anonymous sources gives them weight they don't have. Your statement is on record, their anonymous impressions are not." "Right. Nadia, there's something else." She knew, from the way Caroline's voice shifted by the smallest fraction, that the something else was the third wave. "Your father called our office this morning," Caroline said. Nadia was quiet. "He wants to speak with you," Caroline said, "not through us directly." She looked at the window in Elian's kitchen, the spider plant on the sill, the morning light on the brick wall outside. "Did he say what about?" she said. "He said he wants to talk about the situation. He said he thinks you're making a mistake." She thought about the chair by the window, the flat, even voice, the hands clasped behind the back, the 6 sentences that had changed the course of her life before she had been given any say in it. "Tell his office," she said, "that I'll speak with him this week in person." Caroline paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "I'm not afraid of that conversation. I should have had it 4 years ago." She arranged to meet her father at a hotel in the business district, a neutral place with no history in it. She chose the location herself. She chose the time, 11 on a Wednesday morning, because Wednesday mornings she had always been at her landscape sessions, and her father did not know she had moved those to Tuesday, which meant he would have no prior associations with the time that might give him an edge. She was thinking in those terms now, edges, not advantages to claim but positions to not give away. Leonard Hargrove was 61 years old, and he looked exactly the same as he had looked in the chair by the window 4 years ago, which was to say that he looked like a man who had decided, at some point in his life, that certainty was more efficient than curiosity, and had been right about enough things since then to keep believing it. He was already seated when she arrived. This annoyed her, not because it was a tactical move, though it was, but because he would not have done it deliberately. He would have simply arrived early because he always arrived early, and it would not have occurred to him to think about what message that sent. She sat down. He said, "You look tired." "I'm fine," she said. "Nadia, what you've done." "I'd like to talk," she said, "but I'd like to do it in order, and in order means starting from the beginning, not from the point you've decided is the problem." He looked at her. "What beginning?" he said. "The Thursday in October 4 years ago," she said, "the courtroom with the notary and the lawyers." He was quiet. "You signed my name," she said, "on a document that bound my life to someone else's without asking whether it was a life I would have chosen." The situation was. "I'm not asking you to justify it," she said. "I'm asking you to hear it just once, without explaining why you had to." He looked at her. His hands were on the table and they were still, which was different from how they usually were, which was clasped, or folded, or doing something that established he was in control of the space. "All right," he said. She took a breath. "I was 23, she said. "I was told 4 days before the signing. I wore a blue dress because my mother said blue was calming. I walked into that courtroom and I signed my name and I did not argue, and I have spent 4 years understanding why I didn't argue and what it cost and what it made me believe about myself." Leonard said nothing. "It made me believe that my choices were things other people could make," she said. "It made me believe that what I wanted was not relevant data. It made me very good at adjusting to the shape of whatever I was placed in. And that is a skill. I'll tell you that being that adaptable is actually a skill, but it is not a life." He looked at the table. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "The merger would have collapsed, the trust." "I know," she said. "I know what the stakes were. I understand the finances. I understand the land. I have spent 4 years in that house learning to understand the architecture of the arrangement better than anyone, and I know that you were not cruel when you did it. You genuinely believed it was the right thing." He looked up. "But believing something is right, and it being right for the person it affects most are not the same thing," she said. "And I need you to hear that." Not because it changes what happened, but because I have a child coming into the world, and I am not going to raise that child inside the belief that other people's certainties outweigh its own. The hotel around them was doing its quiet weekday morning business. Coffee cups, a low murmur of other conversations, someone at a distant table laughing. Leonard was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The things they're saying about you. I know what they're saying. It's not right," he said. The way they're describing you, it's not right." She looked at him. This surprised her, not enormously, but enough. "No," she said, "it's not. I'd like to if there's something I can do to push back against it." She thought about the character articles, the anonymous sources, the careful shape of the accusations that were not quite accusations. "You don't need to fight my battles," she said. "I can fight them, but there is something you could do." "What?" "Stop agreeing with them that this is a scandal," she said. "When people call you, when they ask for your take on the situation, stop playing the role of the concerned father whose daughter has embarrassed everyone, because that is the role they are writing for you, and if you play it, you become part of their story." He looked at her. "What would you have me say instead?" he said. She picked up her coffee cup. "Tell them," she said, "that your daughter is a woman who made her own choices and you support her. Even if you only say it because I've asked you to, even if you don't fully mean it yet, say it enough times and meaning follows." Leonard was quiet. She drank her coffee. She thought, this is the furthest from finished we will ever be. He and I, there is still everything unsaid. But this is further than I expected to get on a Wednesday morning in a hotel with no history in it. He said, "I'll think about what you've said. That's all I'm asking." She stood up. She put on her coat. "Nadia," he said. She waited. "I don't know how to say I was wrong," he said. I don't know how to do that." She looked at him. 61 years old, certain about so many things, standing at the edge of one very specific uncertainty. She thought, this is what it looks like. A person at the place where they know they got something wrong and cannot yet find the door to the other side of it. She thought, I know that place. "You just said it," she told him. "What you said just now, that's how you do it. You don't need a better version, that version was enough." She left. Outside the hotel, the city was moving at full Wednesday speed, and the air was cold, and she stood on the pavement for a moment in her dark green coat with her hands in her pockets, and she breathed it in. She thought that might be the beginning of something, or it might not. Either way, I've said what needed saying. She walked to her car. She called Elian. "How was it?" he said. "Hard," she said, "and not as hard as I expected." "Is he going to help?" "I don't know," she said. "But he knows what I need him to know. That's what I went for." She drove back to the South Quarter. The third wave, as it turned out, was the one she had not forecasted. It came not from the press or the legal team or her father, but from Lyra Calloway, who sent a message to Caroline's office addressed to Nadia directly, with a short and simply worded note that said, "I heard what you wrote, and I want you to know that I always thought you deserved better than what you were given. I am not in a position to say more than this, but I wanted to say this much." Nadia sat in Elian's kitchen and read the message twice. She held her phone. She thought about the state dinner, the green dress, the hand on the arm, the soft laugh that was not performed. She thought about two women in different cages. She typed back, "I believe you, thank you." She put the phone down. She pressed her hands flat on the kitchen table. She thought, every story has a layer no one writes about, the one that lives underneath the version that gets told. She thought, I'm glad I know that layer exists. Outside, the South Quarter was going about its afternoon, and somewhere nearby the children were playing again, and the sound they made was the clear, high, careless sound of people who are not yet old enough to know that things have weight. Nadia listened to it. She thought, that is what we're going toward, that lightness, we'll get there. The clock was still turning, the process was still in motion. There were still weeks, probably months, of legal correspondence and formal hearings, and the particular exhausting bureaucracy of making a life legally separate from another life. But the floor was solid under her. And that was enough for today. The baby came on a morning in early March when the sky was the color of newsprint, and the wind outside Elian's flat was making the particular sound of a day that cannot decide what it wants to be. Nadia had been awake since 3, not because anything had started yet, just because her body had developed the habit in the last weeks of waking her at 3 and keeping her company for a while before letting her sleep again, the way a person does when they want to be sure you are paying attention. She had lain in the dark and listened to Elian's breathing and thought about all the things she had thought about in the dark over the past months. The floor they had built, the steps they had taken, the things that were still in motion, and the things that had already resolved. The divorce had been finalized 18 days ago. She had not cried when Caroline called with the confirmation. She had not celebrated either. She had said thank you, and she had stood at Elian's kitchen window and looked at the spider plant for a long time, which by now had 3 new offshoots and had entirely forgiven its previous drought. Cale had not challenged the final terms. She believed this was because his legal team had advised him that a public fight would cost more than a private settlement, and because the certified medical report made certain positions very difficult to hold. He had not spoken to her since the study. She had not expected him to. What they had was not the kind of broken thing that required speaking to each other afterward. It was simply over, complete. The way a door closes and the room is just a room again. Lyra Calloway had left the country 2 weeks after the filing became public. Nadia had read this in a brief item in the press. She had not felt what she expected to feel, which was something large. She had felt, briefly, the quiet recognition of someone watching the consequences of a thing ripple outward in all directions, touching everyone who had been standing near it. She hoped Lyra had gone somewhere that deserved her. It was a generous thought, and she was aware it was generous, and she let herself have it anyway, because generosity was a choice she was making now about what kind of person she was going to be on the other side of all this. Not endlessly, not foolishly, but in the way of someone who has been through enough to understand that bitterness is heavy, and she had already carried enough weight. At 5:30 she knew it was time. She woke Elian with a hand on his shoulder, and he was awake immediately in the way of someone who had been sleeping lightly on purpose, prepared. "Okay," he said. "Just that." She had thought when this day came that she might be afraid. She had examined the possibility of fear many times over the preceding weeks, turning it over the way she turned over everything, checking its weight and its shape. And the fear was there, some of it, the particular sharp attention of a body that knows something significant is happening to it. But underneath the fear was something else, something she had no single word for. It was the feeling of a person who has traveled a very long road and can see, not the end exactly, but the next good place to stop and rest. Patricia met them at the hospital. She had driven herself from the estate, which she had also left 3 months earlier, having given her 22-year notice in a letter that was precisely 1 paragraph long, and that ended, "I wish the house well. It has not always deserved it." She was standing at the entrance when they arrived, wearing her good coat and carrying a thermos of tea, and she looked at Nadia and said, "How are you doing?" And Nadia said, "I'm doing." Which was true, she was doing exactly that. The room they gave her was small and pale, and had a window that looked out onto a car park, which she had been warned about and which turned out not to matter because the view inside the room was sufficient. The view inside the room was Elian sitting in the chair beside her, not going anywhere. The view inside the room was Patricia standing by the window drinking her tea and being steady, which was what Patricia was and had always been, the steadiest human being Nadia had ever known. The hours went by with the particular slow-fast quality of hours that contain something enormous. Time in those hours is different from ordinary time. It moves strangely. It is both very slow and impossible to hold on to. Nadia went through it the way she had learned to go through hard things. 1 breath at a time, 1 moment, not looking at the whole distance, but just at what was directly in front of her, what she needed to do right now in this minute. Elian held her hand. She noticed the specific quality of how he held it, not gripping, not performing, just there. The way his hands had always been just there, from the terrible hat days and the 2As and the charity events and the gallery and the terrible coffee, and all the small, ordinary moments that had been stitching themselves together into a life neither of them had planned, but both of them, she thought, had been moving toward without knowing it. At 9:47 in the morning, the room became very briefly the most important place in the world, and then it settled back into being a room, and in Nadia's arms was something small and real and impossibly new. She looked down. She had been told by everyone that the moment would be overwhelming, that she would feel something enormous and probably cry and possibly not know what to do. She had been told this by enough people that she had prepared for it the way you prepare for a wave. You plant your feet. She had not prepared for how simply it would come. Because it was not a wave. It was a stillness. She looked at the small face and the world around her went perfectly, utterly quiet for a moment, the way the world goes quiet when something true is present in it, and she thought, "Oh, here you are, I've been coming toward you this whole time." The baby made a sound. She was not ready, and she was the most ready she had ever been for anything in her life. Elian was crying. He did not seem to know it yet, which she found so completely like him that something in her chest did something she didn't have a word for. Patricia, by the window, pressed one hand to her mouth and looked at the ceiling and then back down, and her eyes were very bright. Nadia held the baby. A nurse adjusted something and said something kind and left them alone. The hospital bracelet on Nadia's wrist caught the light from the pale window. She looked at it. White plastic letters printed cleanly. Her name. Just her name. Nadia Hargrove. She had gone back to her own name at the finalization quietly, without announcement, the way you take back something that was always yours. She had not told the press. She had not made a statement. She had simply signed the forms and handed them back and walked out with her name in her hand. She looked at it on the bracelet. Nadia Hargrove. She read it once, twice, 3 times. She thought, that's who I am. She thought, that's who I was always going to be, if I could just get back to it. Elian leaned over and looked at the baby and then at her and he said, "She's here." "She's here," Nadia said. The room was very quiet and very full at the same time, the way rooms are when the right people are in them. Outside the car park was a car park and the sky was the color of newsprint and the wind was doing what the wind does, which is go on regardless, move through every space, climb every wall, touch every surface without being stopped by any of them. Inside the room, Nadia held her daughter. She thought about the bathroom floor. She thought about the kitchen with the warm flower smell. She thought about the oak trees and the gray notebook and the small handwriting she had used so that no one would find her thoughts, and the plant on the windowsill and Caroline Marsh above the bookshop, and the gallery with the photograph of Scotland, all gray water and white sky. She thought about her father saying, "I don't know how to say I was wrong." She thought about Lyra's short note arriving through a legal office like a small truth that had finally found the right address. She thought about a man who said okay, who held her hand without gripping, who watered the spider plant and made terrible coffee and drove to the coast with her one weekend in February and stood on the beach in the wind and laughed at the cold and said, "We'll come back here in the summer when she can see it." She thought about summer. She thought, we're going to have summer. And then she stopped thinking about all of it and just held her daughter and breathed, and the room held them all. Nadia and Elian and Patricia and the baby who did not yet have a name, but who was already, absolutely, completely, the realest thing in the world. The clock on the wall read 9:52. The car park was a car park. The sky was the sky. And in a small pale room in a city that did not yet know what had just begun, Nadia Hargrove looked at her daughter's face and thought, "I am going to tell you everything, when you are old enough. I am going to tell you all of it, the whole road, every part of it, not because it was perfect, but because it was real and it was ours and we got through it together, and that is worth knowing. I am going to tell you that you can choose yourself, even when it is late, even when it costs you something, even when the people who made the rules have had 4 years of you following them. I am going to tell you that okay is the most generous word in the language. I am going to tell you that ground under your feet is not a luxury. It is the thing you go after, whatever it takes, however long the road." She looked at her daughter. The baby's eyes were closed, and her fists were curled, and she was breathing with the steady, serious breathing of someone who has just arrived somewhere after a long journey, and is very busy adjusting to the light. Nadia smiled. She thought, welcome, you are so wanted, you have been so waited for. You are going to have a good life. I promise. And then she stopped making promises and just sat in the quiet room with the people who had not left, and held the best thing that had ever happened to her, and let the day go on around them, unhurried and ordinary and entirely, completely theirs.